So, Alex, you're on.
All right. Honestly, it's really good to be with you guys. Obviously, you know who I am, just because I was able to come sit with you guys that one time, and just because we've done some collaboration between GRIP and Optimum Joy, the counseling center. So, just as we were talking last time when I was here about like how do we get some of these big ideas captured so that you guys can continue to do the work that you're doing with the mentors and the mentees. Is that what you guys call them? Students? Yeah.
Students, mentees, students.
Nice. Student's a little easier to say, I feel like, but mentor mentee, it gets a little like discombobulated. So today we're just going to cover emotional literacy, the role of emotions, and I feel like where we're going is the fact that like this is actually work that you guys had to be doing yourselves, and that actually sets up your mentors to be more of a regulated emotional person because the way our brains work, and then that actually sets up your students to be more of a regulated person, because the main way that we learn is actually through modeling. It's how language development happens. It's how we pick up those like nuanced behaviors in the culture and all that different stuff. But just I was telling that the formation of my career was actually in a young adult low income employment program for 17 to 24-year-olds. So a really, I would say, similar demographic. You know, you got the angry kid, you've got the shy kid, you got the silent depressed kid, you got the anxious kid. We have all these kind of types, and at the bottom, we're going to look at, and especially through one of our handouts, how do we get to like the need that's going on despite the emotion that's happening. So that's where we're headed, and I'm curious just from you guys. I'm like very conversational, and if somebody has like a question or a comment, I would just be like, just say it honestly. So I'm curious, we had established a few goals for today, but is there anything particular that you guys have on the front end that you're like, this would be helpful? And we'll leave some time for Q&A at the back end too, but it's all right if not. Let's dive in. Sounds good. We're going to spend a ton of time on not a ton of time, about half the time on understanding emotions and the fact that we are mind-body connected. So just some baselines. I feel like these are, everybody like knows these to some degree, but just to really recognize that like everybody actually has emotions and feelings. They're universal. And the second point there is feelings aren't inherently bad, that feelings are actually good. And I think that especially if anybody grows up, I think particularly in a Christian community, somehow like there's this undergird that feelings are really bad and that you shouldn't feel your feelings, that you shouldn't like make decisions based off your feelings, and that is actually something not to tune into. So not only do we want to say that they're not bad, I want to actually say that they're good, and that I think that it can go two ways. Emotions can either be a dictator, where you don't really realize what's going on in your life and they will drive your decisions, or you can tune in and they'll be more like a guide. So that's, I think, our goal, is that emotions would actually be a guide, and that they're not the end all be all, but they help us to start make decisions about our lives. So that's what we're kind of focusing on. Feelings, they just happen. You can't actually force yourself to feel or not feel something. Have you ever just been like, if I could just like cry and like move through this moment? Or, you know, if anybody feels like a little blue sometimes, it's like, I just want to like be happy. You know, we can't actually like force ourselves to feel things. I feel like positive psychology would say a little bit different. Like if you smile, it like changes your brain chemistry and then you'll feel happy. And that's true to some degree, but for the most part, we can't white knuckle. You can't force yourself to actually feel anything, which is just important to know. And then emotions, thoughts, and behaviors are all different. When people come into counseling, this is something that I think is really important to separate out, because they all get discombobulated and joined together. But just to sort out, okay, your behavior, let's say, I'm trying to think of maybe some stuff that maybe your students would be going through. Let's say like casual sex or smoking and drinking, that these behaviors, which are important and are risky while they're happening, sometimes you have to tune into the emotion that's driving the behavior and the thoughts that are cycling through someone's mind before you can actually shift or change behavior. So I think actually splicing those things out, and when you're sitting with people to splice them out, is really important, because you can start to get at the heart level of what's going on. with that emotional undercurrent and the actual needs that they're presenting. And lastly, emotions are mind-body connected. We're going to look at body sensations. If you look at this next slide, this study was really fascinating. It was done years ago. I'm actually not sure what the year, but they measured people's physiological, biological responses to certain like happy, like different emotional stimuli. So like something that like someone looked angry, and they would measure where people had physiological responses in their body. Yeah, so like let's look at depression, which is like a really common one. Well, let me say something real quick. It wasn't actually, sometimes they were measuring hot and cold in the body, but those like the more yellow or red it is the more kind of blood rushes to that area. And like if you're angry, where do you feel it? Head. Yep. I think a lot of times, like in your fists or your feet, because your body's literally preparing to like fight whatever it is that's making you angry. So we have these different physiological responses. And then depression almost feels like, that heaviness that seeps in. And it's like, wow, isn't that amazing that when something sad came up, that participants regularly felt a body sensation that we kind of have a language for, or we know what it feels like, but we don't often tune in to the sensations that are going on inside of our bodies. And I think that this is helpful because it puts a picture to some of it. And I'm curious if there's any that you guys, as you're looking at this, are surprised by or are like noticing anything about like the physiological responses.
I looked at it yesterday, obviously,
Yeah.
when you sent it, and I was kind of enamored by some of it because I have felt myself feeling parts of my body reacting in different conversations with people or situations, and I can see this and go, oh my gosh, that's what I felt. I literally felt specifically anger, shame,
Shame is
and pride. Like I could, in times when I'm operating in pride, I can feel it in that very part. So it was really weird to like identify and go, man, I need to radio into what I'm feeling physically to kind of help me understand what I'm going through emotionally.
Exactly. Yeah, I feel like pride is even interesting because how, they say like puffed chest. Yeah, exactly. On the bottom here is like cold feet, sweaty palms, goosebumps, all these different, weak in the knees, butterflies. If you just like starting to like get to know somebody and you get all these like butterflies in your stomach, it's like there's all these physiological responses that our body is trying to say, hey, tune into this. There's something going on here. And language is housed in a different part of our brain. It's actually like over in this left upper side. And our emotion center is in our right side. It's in I'm sure it's kind of a buzzword, the amygdala, all that different stuff, fight or flight. We're going to get into that. But sometimes it's a lot harder to put language on feelings. So sometimes it's really helpful to start with like, what am I feeling in my body? And how can that actually guide me to know the emotion that I'm experiencing? I think another thing to add on to this is our brain actually thinks in pictures. So anytime, and I think that some of our young people are so creative, or they're able to put like a metaphor or an image or a song that like they might not be able to say, I'm sad, but they might be able to give you this picture of what it looks like and means to be sad. I was working with a gentleman recently. We were talking around shame and sadness, and the picture he drew on a paper was this massive cave and him like crouched very tiny at the bottom of it. And what does that actually communicate about the aloneness? And I feel like I can't get out of here and all these different things. So sometimes if you're trying to help somebody tune into what they're feeling, or if you're doing that yourself, start to get at this sensory data, but also start to get at this like imagery, colors, shapes, how large is it? And that all is how our right brain thinks. And amazingly, the way we process information is let me back it up. We're a very left-brained culture. Lists, get things done, achievement, language is all in our left brain, and that drives a lot of what we do. But what's fascinating is we're actually finding out that we start gathering information in the right side of our brain, and we spiral over to make sense of it in our left, but we act again out of the right side, which is more creative and emotional, and that is actually what is the kind of final say on a lot of what we do. So it's important to kind of tune into what's going on in my body, what's going on visually, all that sensory data, all that different stuff. Any thoughts or questions as you guys are, no? Because, the longer I'm a therapist, I've been seeing people since 2013, so not super long in the therapy world, but I feel like long enough to maybe know some stuff. And the longer I'm a therapist, I feel like two things really resonate for me is that people absolutely make sense if you listen long enough, and that the mind and the body is far more connected than we ever thought. So that's why I always like hammer on the fact that like our body is guiding us towards our emotional data. I really appreciate, a lot of your handouts actually come from, it's not a Christian organization. I personally went through one of their trainings and circles, but it's called the Women's Leadership Lab that operates here in Chicago. And they've like given permission to like give these out and stuff. But this one I really appreciate because, let me orient you to it. It's a scale of the intensity of emotions. So you can see that like rage versus frustration on that trajectory, and then glad versus like ecstasy. So it kind of moves on that continuum. And I really appreciate that it says culturally perceived negative and culturally perceived positive, because again, feelings and emotions are not bad. We just culturally perceive them as one way or the other. Some families that we grew up in, it's like, I'm trying to think in my family, like anger was not really that accepted of an emotion. It's like, don't be angry, have like a happy face on, be like the perfect family, and just like only be happy. But even then, I would say, even though I wasn't allowed to be very far this way, it was probably maybe more like in the ones, I probably was constricted too into this range because of what was allowed emotionally growing up. And I'm curious for both like the mentors that you're mentoring and also like the mentees, where do they skew on this scale? Do they skew one way or the other? Are they constricted? What is their range of emotional expression that you've seen?
I think it's so interesting because I think for us it's common for us to identify like the differences between some of our mentors and our students culturally or just like maturity. But looking at this, I think that this might be where there's the most of a distinction. And I think that a lot of our mentors are probably more restricted in what they allow themselves to feel. And they're starting life on life with students, many who I think because of youth and their experience maybe have not been like trained in the culture to be so restrictive. So they're on the other end of like very led by their feelings and emotions.
Interesting.
And, just not really. I think both are undiscerning often of how they're actually feeling and not connecting that to their behavior.
Yeah. I work with about half my caseload of the counseling practices with men, and interestingly enough, I think men skew to the right. They are way more comfortable with anger and frustration and getting large, partly because like the main shame trigger research shows for men is weakness. Like that if I am weak, I'm forgetting the second one. For women, it's motherhood and beauty are like main shame triggers. But I think that men actually skew to the right because that actually feels more powerful. And oftentimes, like, what I think our goal for ourselves to do is to maybe like, if I'm right here in this narrow range, how can I personally start to be mindful of when I can tune in or when I can start to experience or seek out some experiences that would maybe bump me into a larger category. And I think the same is true with with the people that we work with, is how can we help them expand their range of expression, expand their window of tolerance, especially for trauma-related things? How can we expand that so that they can also start to tune into what emotions are coming up for me and how does it guide me towards a need, and then how do I resource that need? Where I was going at the beginning with this, before I went off on that tangent, is these boxes I think are really helpful symbols in the sense that if we are mind-body connected and emotions are housed in our bodies, then to move through them, you have to actually express them bodily. So if I see someone that I love and I'm so happy, like giving them a hug, or, if I'm like really sad, you see like the crying, but like running, all these different things, journaling is a way to start to engage our bodies with emotions and to move through it. We have to use our bodies to actually move through it. Yeah. Any thoughts, any questions?
I can't see. What is the second one over? It looks like that on the top is.
I think it's a little meditating person.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So if I follow rage all the way over, that's the same category, right? So then terror all the way over. It's not just lists of words, right?
It's a little bit of both.
Okay.
When
I was
they
trying to understand how
absolutely.
it flows.
It's a little bit of both. I would not say that this line it is and is not exactly a continuum between glad to ecstasy, but they're really similar. But it's more kind of what maybe does it look like to be in those different categories. So some of them do follow their like tense, anxiety, scared, panic, terror. Like it seems like that is a progressive continuum. So it's a little bit of that and also just like what expression-wise is in this category.
And then when it says intentional movement and release,
Yep.
Under the negative, the physical release, culturally perceived as negative,
Yeah.
is that how the body processes that emotion to release that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I think that's where I think you're asking is like, is that like then to move through and like release those things? I think that this is just a few ideas, but this is where I would say tune into people's creativity. One of the questions I always ask people is like, what is your mode of creativity? Are you a writer? Are you into music? Are you an artist? Is it in how you dress and express yourself? What does that look like for you? Because if we have to do it through our bodies, maybe somebody's going to be all over journaling and somebody's like, no, I've never written and I won't ever write a thing in my life, So
I love journaling.
there we go. You're a journaling one. Those are like great counseling people because I'm like, oh, just go journal. And it's like, perfect. But it takes a little bit more work sometimes to get at other people's, because we have to start thinking around creativity. So these are just really ideas of how it looks to bodily express the emotion that's going on. And when you actually express something instead of suppressing it, then you can move through it.
You're probably getting here, but speaking of suppressing it,
Yeah.
I'm curious to see or to hear about how our bodies might react when we like refuse a physical release. And like I know what that feels like in myself if I feel like some type of anxiety or pressure or like I haven't worked out or I haven't
Right.
created anything.
Yeah.
And then it feels like it just sits on me. But I'm interested in like what long-term effects on our bodies.
Bodies. There's really fascinating studies. We are going to get towards that. When we get stuck, what are ways that we can move through that? But there's these ACE studies. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, and they looked at adverse childhood experiences and how they played out on the longitude, the long-term actual physical consequences in the healthcare system. And it's like if you, had a parent who drank a little bit too much, you're like 4 times as likely to have diabetes. I made that up, so that's not like a real statistic, but it's just like, yeah. So it's like really important that you take care of these things and not suppress them, because if you don't express and release them in our bodies, they stay housed. And I don't know if you guys have ever read The Body Keeps the Score.
Yes.
Yeah. That's all about the fact that prolonged emotional suppression and turmoil within our system, it has to go somewhere. So does it go into like a chronic ache in your shoulder that then debilitates you in your life? Does it go into, some of those pictures of what we saw bodily, like a constant state of heaviness and depression? It has to go somewhere. So our bodies take care of it. Yeah. And in a way, it's really wise of our bodies, the way God created them, because as we're going to get into just the way it works in our brain and the feedback loop with our body, it's all, I always like to be super honoring of the way people have chosen to cope with things. Let's say, I don't know, someone is an alcoholic. Obviously, we don't want them to be an alcoholic. That's really not healthy. But it actually allowed somebody to survive and make it to the point of time. And there's this, I think it's a Chinese proverb that like the raft gets you across the river, but then you need to not carry it. And I think that our coping, even our maladaptive coping stuff, helps us get to a certain point in time. But then like, when is it not actually helpful and useful to us anymore? Like, when do I need to stop drinking my life away and actually like pick up maybe new ways? And I think even our faith has so many different like resources to offer us. But the fact that it like helped you survive and it helped you get to where you are is like really important. And I think our bodies do that naturally, because sometimes like you can't do this right now, so we're gonna help you just quickly make it through it. Like we're just gonna amp up that anxious feeling, and at least you'll get from A to B. But it's not the most healthy overall. I gave you guys 2 different handouts. Really, I just want these to be resources for you guys. So one of them is words of sensations, and it is literally a 3-column list of bodily sensations. And, if I were to say afraid, what are different bodily sensations that you could pull from that list that would be like symptom or like bodily symptoms of fear? Clammy. Tightness. Yes. Yeah. Tightness.
Tight shoulder.
Yes. This kind of I'm braced for action. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. What about relief?
Sighing.
Exactly.
Breathing out.
It's kind of like this washing of like over your system. Relief is one of the only emotions you can't really fake. So whenever you experience a moment of relief, tune into that, because that is something that your body has been trying to tell you for a while, but your head hasn't been able to recognize it. But it's kind of that like, oh, I finally come to understand what that is. So I give you that list because I think it's helpful when you're starting to expand your emotional language. If you're starting from the bottom up, sometimes like, I have no idea what I'm feeling. And to just like scan this list and be like, what is bouncing out at me right now? And how can I tune into that to then like take the next steps forward? The other handout I gave you, this is one of my all-time favorite handouts. It's called the faux feelings one. There is arguably like 6 to 7 what we call core emotions: sad, mad, glad, shame, fear, I think are the ones. Surprise might be in there too. There's a couple that like do or do not make the list. And the faux feelings one, it starts on the very left-hand side, kind of in our everyday vernacular. Like if someone says left out, like I'm feeling really left out, that's actually not a core feeling. So if you were to follow left out to the middle category, what are the feelings that it says there? Sad, lonely, anxious. More of these kind of core things. Now follow it all the way over to the far right side and call out the needs that are there. Inclusion, belonging, community, connection. The whole reason that we want to tune into emotions is because we want to get at needs. And our sensations help us get into our emotions, which then help us get into our needs, so then we can actually communicate them and we can start to resource them within ourselves, within our relationship with God, and within our relationships with other people. But until we know what our needs are, we can't actually do that step. So all this emotional stuff is actually getting at felt needs. And, I didn't give you guys this, but we in the office have like a list of all the different needs that have shown up through research. And it's amazing to see the physical needs, such like food, water, shelter, on this whole list maybe takes up like a chunk that big on an entire piece of paper. Connectedness, meaning and purpose, all these other ones are actually, they make up the bulk of needs. And I think that when we think through like our own lives and then also the people that we're helping. How can you help someone get at meaning and purpose for their life? How can you help someone feel connected and belonging? Those are really what is going to change the way someone feels about their life.
You have that chart somewhere?
You know, I can send it to you guys. I'll send it to you guys. So now kind of the fun part. Now that we know what we feel, how do we move through in a moment? So we're gonna look at, you know, I'm kind of a brain nerd. Before I was a counseling person, I was a biology person. Yeah, seems like a far distant reality, but my anatomy and physiology textbook is the only textbook I ever kept, and every once in a while, like a true nerd, I just like to kind of peruse it and stuff. So I'm just gonna talk a little bit about the brain and what's going on, and then we're gonna talk about a feedback loop system and how to actually like regulate a heightened and a numbed out response, and then using these different tools to actually care for ourselves and our emotions. So this is one of the most helpful pictures because let me back up. So if we think through our brains, you know, I think it's Dan Siegel has coined like a hand model of the brain. You're nodding your head. Are you familiar with it? Yeah. Yeah. So you have in the right center, you have like your emotion center or your amygdala. Down at the base of your brain is your brainstem, and that like they call it like the reptilic region because it's things like that you don't think about, like your breathing, your heart rate, the way your eyes dilate, all those different things are housed down here, your automatic responses. And then curved over the top, which is one of the things that they say like really makes us human, is our prefrontal cortex, which is all decision-making capacity. So this, when our system goes into fight or flight, or even numbed out and like freeze, it's actually going through this feedback loop. I will just draw really quick because we'll get to it later. But basically, it's working like a thermostat. All of our body systems work on what we call homeostasis. So there's a set point in the middle. So you think like, I don't know what you guys keep your thermostat on, but let's say like it's pretty chill. Let's say 65. I don't know. It's gonna be hot this summer, and we're like, you know. Yes. So like as the thermostat like bumps up to like 66, 67, it's gonna kick on, and it's gonna bring that temperature back down. And the same for when it starts to get below, and it just works on a constant system. Our brains and our bodies work that way. So in the sympathetic, you don't have to remember those words, but basically you want to know like it's the aroused, like hypervigilant, or it's the numbed out, restful one. And when our bodies are working normal, when a threat or a challenge enters the system, it bumps us up into more of this activated response. And in our bodies, this is why it's really important about our mind-body connection. Your heart starts accelerating, all the blood actually rushes to where it's accessible, your digestion shuts down, which is interesting because people in prolonged anxiety actually have like a lot of digestive issues because their digestive, like they're always activated and their digestive system is suppressed. That, I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it? That would make sense. So all of our system starts to rush to prepare you to take on something that is unsafe. And then on the other end is like, okay, I realized that it was just a car backfire as a loud noise. It's not like a gunshot or anything like that. And then you start to come back down to normal and even into like a state of rest and recovery and then back up. And we just are constantly doing that. So we're gonna look at later just more and just like a little bit actually how when that gets stuck or off. So the way that our loop gets activated or I like to call them challenges. I think threat is also a really good word, but these are research shows the 4 different things that activate somebody, their amygdala, to start scanning the environment and to start communicating with their lower part of the brain that you need to be ready for something. And it starts to communicate, and this goes offline. Your prefrontal cortex goes offline. So, you know, and I want to think together, like even specifically as you're helping mentors with the students, I think that the demographic and population you serve, don't they have like some unique threats and challenges, like physical threat and emotional threat? You know, what is in their daily life that would activate their system? The unknown is a big one, especially for anxiety. Anytime you're working with someone, the time, the place, the more details you can make known, the more regulated someone's system will be.
The time, the place, like a what?
And let's say like you're meeting somebody.
Okay.
How many of us have kind of tentatively made plans with somebody who's maybe like a little flaky? I'm like a little bit of a planner, so maybe it's like my natural tendency, but I'm kind of like, oh yeah, like sounds good, like I'll put it in my calendar. When exactly are we meeting? Where are we going? Blah, 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 blah. Are we gonna eat food? I need to know, I need to be ready to eat, you know? And when someone isn't getting back to me, I'm a lot better at this now. I'm a lot more chill now. So, but like that's like a whole unknown situation that just kind of has me, oh, I wonder when they're gonna call me. I wonder when they're gonna do this. All this different. It just starts to spin, and it gets us like up in our activated system. Incongruence in the environment. I think the best way to illustrate this is when someone's like, I'm not mad. You know, like that doesn't make sense. What you're saying and what you're doing does not make sense, you know? How often, I don't know, for the parent, I'm not a parent, but for the parents in the room,
Yes.
and your kids are like, well, you sure look mad, so like, I don't believe you.
Yeah.
And it's a lack of trust, actually. I can't actually trust that what you're saying and doing feels right. So anything that feels off. The last one is the most fascinating to me. When we are, so Brene Brown has done a ton of research. I call her Brene. She is like my bestie in a lot of ways. We have moved beyond. She doesn't know me. But she does this thing where she'll have people, and then Lisa Dion is someone who I think has like piloted a lot of this different stuff, like the neurobiology. And I just want you guys to a minute, like if you need to close your eyes or whatever, I want you to sit in a moment where like all the should and should nots, just like let them, I'm just gonna like, we're gonna go for maybe like 30 seconds. And I just want you to like sit in that space. I should be thinner. I should have done better at my job. I should not have run the red light. I should have run the red light. Just like sit in that space for a little bit and start to notice like what happens in your body. And when you're ready, open your eyes and come back to me. What do you notice starts to happen in your body when you start to like live in that space?
Stop breathing,
Stop breathing.
or stop breathing deep.
Yeah. You get a little activated. Yeah. Anything else?
Heart rate
Heart rate? Yeah.
just doesn't feel comfortable.
Doesn't, yeah. Something is like, oh, this is not good.
Confusion. It's like no peace.
Yeah. When we live in a space where we are shoulding on ourselves all the time, for maybe lack of a better phrase, it actually registers as a threat in our brains that we are incongruent with ourselves. And how many, I even think about the couple of grip students that I get to work with who have these like dreams for their life, but aren't able to actually get there. And how much does the weightiness of should weigh on them? Plus add the complexities of maybe just like the environment, you know, that like, I should be able to pay my phone bill, but you can't, you know, and just all these different things. So there's like a weightiness there.
But even like in faith, you think of like, I should do what's right. Or like if you're in a very legalistic religious background, that's what I came out of. Is like, I should have this time with Jesus. I should not have done this. I should, and it paralyzes you. And then what I've learned like in the recent years is knowing who you are in Him, knowing how He views you. It releases that should.
Absolutely.
Because it binds you up.
Yeah.
Otherwise, so I think even in faith, there's that
Yeah.
shoulding that happens.
I very strongly and passionately believe that believers should not, there you go, that believers should not live in a prolonged state of shame. Because I just think that like when we really tune into like what God has actually done for us, and the fact that like, sometimes even too, when we think about the gospel, like it's okay that I'm broken or not enough or bad. You know, like, yes, I want to become more like Christ and all those different things, but like, I actually didn't need to be anything. So this like trying to propel ourselves forward based on shame, because this is rooted in shame. This is shame all over the place. That is actually within our own system, not believing the gospel and not believing what God has done for us. So I think that like if you're tuning into anything with your people, like this is where you want to get, because that influences these like core beliefs about ourselves, which are usually I am statements. I am bad. I am not good. I am worthless. I am unlovable. I am ugly. You know, you just start to get into all these different things that are actually grounded in shame and play themselves out in the shoulds in our lives. Yeah, any other thoughts or questions? Yeah,
I do have a
yeah,
I think just that number 4, and just again when you took it to the I am statements,
yeah.
that is something that I think I regularly hear from our students. Just very final conclusions on who they are, you know. But it is, I think, based on that.
Yeah.
So I think if there's something that we have a lot of.
It's that.
Yeah.
You know, something I think a good question to ask sometimes to narrow down to where you get to that I am statement, because that's what we want to tweak, right? Is that that core belief that is propelling someone to live out of shame is, let's say something happens, to just say, well, what does that mean about you? And depending on how insight oriented somebody is, just to start to keep asking that, well, it means this. You know, I was working with someone, to give an example, that she was having a hard time making eye contact with people, and she normally is pretty good at it. And I was like, well, what does that mean about you? Well, it means that I can't connect with people, da 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 da. And as you funnel it down, that actually people don't want to connect with me and I am unlovable. You know, and that's so much different and more powerful than I'm having trouble making eye contact. Yeah. You know? So I just think that question of, well, what does that mean about you? And to just sit with it and start to like track it downward further and further. The only thing I really want to say in this is when someone is in the like upward activated, which I would say is actually more similar to anxiety. I can't write backwards and upside down, so I'm not going to try that. This is more like anxiety, and down here is more like depression. Someone activated actually believes that they can do something about what's going on. And I think that sometimes that's why depression or this hypo slowness is actually something you really want to look out for, because they've stopped believing that they have anything to do about it. So really helping people have a sense of agency and choice. Again, that meaning and purpose making. That's like that. I mean, it's not good if someone is like kind of slowly dying in some ways. Yeah. So I would just say look out for that, and start to get people making choices again in their life. Even if it's like, I chose to get out of bed and put my feet on the ground. I chose to brush my teeth. You know, it's just like, if you break it down real simple for people and even for ourselves, it's like, no, I did do a lot of things today. And it starts to activate some of that response. You can't actually be curious about what's going on with you if you're stuck in either of these places. That's why we're going to go to like regulating the feedback loop. And I know we're kind of wrapping up on time, but you can't be curious. So we're going to learn what things to do to actually move through that system. And the thing is our brains, because of all our different cells, are taking in around 10 billion bits of data at every moment in time, every single second in time. So there's always stuff like coursing through. So how do you actually filter through some of that and like tune in? I put this up here because I think it's really important that, there was a study on parents. So you had helicopter parents who thought, if I protect my children from everything, that they will actually have the best self-esteem because nothing bad, like they wouldn't have failed basically. And then you had these parents in the same study who let their kids experience things and didn't put a lot of value on winning or losing. And it was those kids that actually had the best self-esteem, because it didn't matter if they succeeded or failed. The fact that they watched themselves make it through a hard thing is what really cultivates true self-esteem. So who cares? Like if you guys actually, I don't know, get your PhD, or if a kid I would want someone to finish high school actually, but like who actually cares? It's more about, wow, you are doing a hard thing. And what is that like? Look at you just like sticking through it. So these are the things. So let's say you get activated, and again, like people in trauma responses are both activated and deactivated. They get stuck in both ways. But you spin up here and then you get stuck. And that's like someone who is kind of chronically anxious. The same thing can happen down here where you get stuck and you never come back to set point, and you have a new regular that's actually, like, to say it dramatically, killing your body. So research shows that these are the ways. I know that people always say deep breathing, and that's like, you know, like kind of cliche, but it actually is starting to work from your brain stem up into your amygdala to say, you don't, like, if you breathe deeply instead of, because like if I'm running away, I'm breathing really shallowly. But if I breathe deeply, it's kind of like, oh, you have nowhere to run right now. And it kind of schemes our brain into realizing there's no actual threat. So when you deep breathe, it both regulates both systems. I think a really simple one that I teach people all the time is doing square breathing, which is like breathe in for 4 seconds, you hold it for 4 seconds, breathe out through your mouth for 4 seconds, and then hold for 4 seconds, and do it maybe like 4 times. And that actually is going to start working from the bottom up to regulate your system. The next one is movement. You know, like if you're sitting in like a shame stance, you know, where you're curled in, you should get up and move out of that stance, you know, to actually start to do something different with your body. Get up and take a walk. Just, you know.
This was yesterday.
Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, like literally, I was stressed, and I was like, okay, we have a meet. I was like, I'm just gonna take a walk for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
It's so good.
It's
Well,
so
I ran around the block
helpful.
2 weeks ago I said, I just gotta get out of this office. Let's go run. So
Exactly.
We ran around the block and we were all.
It gets you back in your body, and it gets you back into like a normal breathing that's appropriate for where you're at. So, yeah. Naming has to do with mindfulness. So if deep breathing and movement work from the bottom up, mindfulness and naming works from the top down in this area. So like if I start to breathe deeply, that communicates something and move. Up here, you want to start to say like, I am scared. You know what? It's actually not unsafe here. Just like really simple messages that then from the top, it puts your prefrontal cortex back online, because that actually when you're activated, more stuff, your body uses this area more and this goes offline. So you have to kind of bring that back online with naming and self-talk. I think that this is really powerful when we think of kind of like existential crises, in the way that like at the end of the day, I am truly alone. I will die, and I'm a limited human being. At the end of the day, doesn't that really get at those core beliefs? But I think some of the self-talk we're, specifically as Christians, are able to do is, oh my gosh, I'm actually never alone. It doesn't matter that I'm gonna die. In fact, Christ died on my behalf so that I can have like a second eternal life. And you know what, maybe I am limited and I get tired, but I serve a God who is outside of time and space and is actually limitless. So I think as Christians, especially in like our mentorship, there's some unique, like look for the I'm alone and let them sit with that, but then like propel them forward to be like, no, you actually aren't alone. That's a similar naming and self-talk. This is something I kind of want to end on is our brains, they're finding out more and more about what we call mirror neurons. So if I sit here and like take a drink of water, whether or not you guys actually take a drink, your system automatically in watching me went, am I thirsty? Yeah, there you go. And we're doing this all the time. And in a fascinating way, our brains actually link up and start to mirror each other. So this is why I was saying at the beginning, if you're doing your work and you're regulating your system, just the person sitting across from you, their brain is going to start to regulate. And like sync up with yours. We see it all the time with mothers and kids, that as they move and they rock a baby, doesn't that soothe the baby? So for parents, for mentoring, just like in your relationships, if you start to do a lot of these things and put them in place, it actually heals the people who you're in relationship with because your brains link up. And yeah, it's so amazing. I love that. And it's really powerful in any helping, like if you're helping anybody. Yeah.
I talk to a lot of people about relationships, and so I see this so much when they're in an unhealthy relationship.
Yeah, the
Because
conversation.
they're just getting toxic and more toxic because
Yeah.
the person they're with is toxic.
Yeah.
So just like you say, regulate, we can also dysregulate based
Exactly.
upon the person that we're with. Bad company corrupts
Yes.
good habit. You know, it's like
Yes.
it's all, you see it in scripture.
Wow.
I was taught this with my daughter who comes from trauma, and so I've been rocking at night. She's really dysregulated in my arms, really frustrated, and I'm frustrated. I'm like, go to sleep, you know,
Yeah.
and it only makes her more frustrated.
Yeah.
And so as I deep breathe and regulate my heart, it regulates her. It's fantastic. It's like incredible to watch how it literally happens. But even if I'm frustrated in my mind and not showing it on my face, which I'm a really good actor,
Yeah.
you can't fake it. Like
Yeah.
the person you're with,
Feel it.
yeah, it's crazy.
And going back to incongruence in the environment, I think if you're feeling so, obviously in an appropriate way for the relationship you have, you don't want to burden your child with your emotional needs. That's not how that role is supposed to play out. But to maybe just say, I'm frustrated. You know, this is really frustrating to me. Or if you're sitting with somebody hearing a really painful thing, and specifically use I language, because again, you don't want to place an emotion on somebody that maybe they're not feeling, but you want them to tune in. So if I say, oh, I tuned in and, oh, I'm sad, that makes me sad. Well, what happens in your system? Am I sad? And even if they're not experiencing the same thing, you have actually prompted a moment of mindfulness and tuning in somebody else. And they might say, I'm sad too, you know? They might also say, I'm not sad, I'm pissed off, you know? But it just allows, first of all, it names it. It allows that emotion to enter the space, and it gives somebody, because I would imagine you guys are all in power dynamics. You guys are all in positions of power in your job. And for somebody in power to start to use emotional language actually gives permission to the people under you to use that same language. I think in a culture where men are not really given a lot of permission to be as emotionally tuned, or like as emotional as women, how powerful too if you as like men start to be like, yeah, you know what? Like, I'm really tired, but actually it's because like someone hurt my feelings and I'm just kind of sad and you know, I'm taking care of it. But like, and to actually name some of that and to give other people and other men specifically, I think, permission to name it. So that's what I have for you guys today. I think we have 5 minutes till 10:30. So I don't know if anybody has any final questions or thoughts. And if not, we can kind of wrap up.
I just had
Yeah,
a question. You mentioned, you talked about how our system kind of gets regulated,
Yeah.
right? And we try to go back to normal, and then sometimes we get stuck. And I was just I couldn't remember, I missed it, but like, what are some causes of us getting stuck?
I would say suppressing an emotion, trauma. You know, also the longer I'm a therapist, I feel like everything comes down to grief and loss, you know, which I think we're actually going to talk about in one of these trainings, grief and loss. Even if it's symbolic, you know, I remember like a very poignant moment with my mom, and it's not her fault. She had some other stuff going on, but where the message that landed in me was, oh, I'm not beautiful. You know, and as like a middle schooler, I carried that with me for a lot of my life. And so just like different events that feed into our shame response, that feed into, I'm trying to think of anything else, into some sense, but in that situation, I feel like that was a loss. I lost my sense of this is part of who I am. So sometimes things are symbolic, and sometimes they're very real. We were talking about somebody we know who had a death in their family. I mean, that's like a very real grief, and then you have symbolic grief. So those things spike people. Stress and life transitions, you can kind of look at it. Yeah.
So my other question is so like, I feel like, so I deal with a lot of different students that are going through so many things, a lot of things that they don't even realize, like, right? And so as a result of that I feel like there's a lot of students who And I think it's amazing that you bring up this point that like our body will naturally kick into different mechanisms to just help us just to get through,
Yeah.
right? And I feel like I have a lot of students who are just trying to just
Get
survive
through,
what
yeah.
they're getting through. So hence they're smoking weed,
Yep.
hence they're like, you know, trying to experience some type of fun for a
Yeah.
moment just to kind of escape the reality of their life, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of different things that I can see that they're doing, but it's because they don't know how to deal with I'm at home and I don't really have anything to eat and I don't know there's issues that are going on between my mom and dad's not there, whatever it may be. And I don't know how to process all that, right? So it's like I'm gonna try to do this, I'm gonna try to do that. And so you know, so like for like me, it's like I don't want them smoking weed, but I get the aspect
You
that
get
they're
it.
just trying to cope. You know what I mean? But that's not that should never be the end result, right?
Yeah.
Like that's not what God wants for their life. And so my question then becomes is like, all right, like I know that's a negative, not the best coping mechanism, whether it be alcohol, whether it be whatever they may do, seeking some thrill, you know? So how do you begin to help them see, one, identify the emotions and then begin to help them process and work through what they're truly feeling and name what it is, you know what I mean? And it's like, even I'm thinking about, okay, how do I do that for myself?
Right,
Exactly.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that's where I gotta start. It's like, 'cause I got a lot of stuff I'm going through right now.
Yeah.
It's like, how do I do that for myself? And then also, how do I help them process and deal with those type of things?
I think first, joining them in partnership and asking, well, is this working for you? Because it is on some level, right? Smoking pot for that person is doing enough for them that they are able to like make it through life. They're surviving. So it's actually, it might be maladaptive coping, but it is coping nevertheless.
Keeping them from committing suicide or whatever.
Yeah. So like to kind of join with them and ask, well, how is it working? And then on the back end of that, how is it not working? You know, like what's going on in your life that maybe that coping mechanism is actually, again, the raft. You're carrying something that isn't helping you anymore. So how can you start to identify what that is? And then, you know, I think it's really fascinating in the Bible, especially you think of like the fruit of the Spirit, is in the passage before, it's put off, put off, put off. And then, well, if I put off and I leave this big hole, well, what am I going to do? You got to put on, you got to put on, you got to put on. So once you start to realize, well, it's maybe not actually working for me in so many ways, and some people won't be ready to give it up. Some people are really attached to their maladaptive coping. But if they start to get ready and evaluate to give it up, what are we going to put in its place? Because if you're taking away weed, what? And here's the thing is if you don't actually do that well, maybe it's sex, maybe it's alcohol, maybe it's, you know, it's like you have to start to fill it with something that's more an adaptive coping. And that's where it's kind of like, let's explore, what is it for you that you feel like, okay, like that helps me deal with this? Is it like talking to a friend? You know, can you be a safe person for them to talk to? Is it, you know, music that actually like helps? So does that feel like it answers your question? Because the same way that this is maybe positive, like how do we helpfully move through emotions? I think we're already doing it, and very often in what we call like a maladaptive way, that it's not actually helpful.
I think I'm just realizing more and more how much I want to know myself more.
Oh, yeah.
And I think I tend to wonder if we sometimes are not helping youth because we don't even know how to process hard things ourselves. So, you know, the more mentors we get and the more lives of youth and the more that it's like, but how are we doing? You know, like, are we healthier than we were yesterday?
Yeah.
Are we letting God deal with our emotions and our feelings? Are we letting ourselves deal with our emotions, our feelings? Because if we can't, you can't ever lead anybody where you've never gone, you know? And it's like, I wonder if, I mean, I know for me, I want to grow more aware of my own feelings and what's going on inside of me. Because the older I'm getting, the more I don't address it.
Yeah.
The busier I get, the less I address it.
Life just happens.
So it's very interesting.
So I would say practical for all of you guys is that faux feeling sheet where you follow it over to a need. Use that. Pull it out, scan the left-hand side. What, like, oh, I feel like that person betrayed me, follow it over. And then again, like I think that some of those things, I think that there could be a moment of attachment to self. There's a moment opportunity for attachment to God, and there's a moment of opportunity to attach to like people or community. So within that moment, once you identify a need, how are you going to resource and take care of that need? But to actually use that sheet to start to get and identify some of those more emotional things. Did you have something?
Yeah, I was just thinking about what Corral said. I think because it's hard to, I think our students will talk about coping and what they're using to cope. And so I think you brought up a good point of like, we're going coping first. What are you using to cope? And then we're trying to go deeper and find out what the emotion behind it is. But also I think how do we, because I don't think you could, how do we work through it with our students and know that it might take time? And what does that look like? And is there a framework or mindset that we can kind of develop? Like you said, like some people won't just let go
They're
of
not
the coping
ready.
mechanisms, right? Or sometimes like, are we constantly having these conversations? Like, is it too much to push? And are we always talking about, okay, like, are we always every time we go back to talking about, okay, you're using weed to cope, like, and how do we develop a framework to healthily walk our students through the process and know what that timeline might be and know that it might be really long.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just important. So,
Yeah.
I don't know if that was just something I was just thinking.
Yeah, how do you practically implement that, and what do you look for? Well, I think first of all, like patience.
Yeah.
You got to be. I would say that the more patient you can be, the more of a visceral learning will happen. That's actually true learning, because honestly too, like if you guys are in positions of power and someone wants to please you, they might just do it only to please you. But I tell you what, at some point in time, life has a way of shifting and moving us, and when you're not in that person's life, even just as much, what's going to motivate them? It has to be intrinsic. It has to be from internal. So the more you can be patient with it and let it like piece by piece kind of strip away, that is actually going to be a learning that like continues with them in life. I really appreciate, I had to read it back in grad school, but is it Packer? Evangelism and the Sovereignty of God? And it talks about how on the whole timeline of someone's life, you enter as a blip. And how do you maybe through conversation after conversation both move somebody a little further on or a little closer to God or a little bit closer to health, but also realize that like God continues with somebody over the whole course of their timeline. So if I'm going to try to force you to learn something that you actually are supposed to learn here, that's not our place, I think. So how do you continue to strip away and like propel, like move somebody a little bit further without actually fake teaching them? So I think patience. I think sometimes taking a step back, how is it for you that we talk about this? Do you even want to talk about it? Like again, what's your motivation?
Their place.
Their space.
Do you want me to push you?
I think what you just said is really good because I think sometimes it helps to lessen the burden that sometimes our mentors put on themselves, and then you feel like I should. You know what I mean? Whereas it's like, no, God is in control. We have to trust in Him. And I even think about like someone like my mom. We talk a lot and have a good relationship, and just thinking about like one of her bigger struggles is like she had a great father, who's my grandpa, who I love dearly, but like he left the family and like 6 daughters when she was like 8 years old.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And like never truly understood why her good father, who loved her and loved all of her sisters, would just leave. And then came back when she was like 38.
Yeah.
And so like her whole time of like the way she viewed God, her relationship with men, just was like, so I can think of a mentor trying to come in, and she's had people in her life that, and we talked, she's like mentors. She's like, I remember when I was younger, I used to be a part of an organization that was somewhat like what you do now and stuff, and like they used to come over and talk to me. She's like, I used to be, but it was just like nothing because of the deep hurt that like took years. And she didn't become a believer until she was 50, just because of like all of the hurt. And so just to kind of think that someone's gonna come in and just like fix and just like this here is like, man, it's like you just don't know how deep that hurt goes. Yeah. And the process that it takes for people to get through.
Yeah. So. What's that saying? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of like intervention. And I think about that in the sense of like how amazing that you guys are interfacing, like through your organization, are interfacing with people at a young age. Because I think that if you just shift Like you think of a plane that leaves New York, based on the degree, they'll end up in Seattle or they'll end up in San Diego. And when you shift someone's life by a degree, how does that then play out over the longevity, you know? So I think it's cool that early intervention, but also at the same time, how many years did it take you to get into this? And I'm not saying that like if it took 12 years to develop this, it's going to take 12 years to get out. But the longer it takes you to walk in, the longer it's going to take you to walk out. And that's where I think the patience and like understanding someone's timeline of their life and how patient I should be kind of depends on maybe how old they are and the complexity of the problem. Maybe, did you have something you want to say? Maybe not.
Oh, well, I just thought it was it's basically saying, because right now we're even coming up with training for, was it trauma-informed mentorship ever? So I think it's for us, like I think you're laying out a lot of theory for us right now.
Yeah.
And we're asking questions of like, how do we practically now apply this?
Yep.
And so I think it's like what you just said was beautiful. Like, where is this person at? What role is God asking us to play right now in this person's life, and having that perspective when things.
Yeah.
So.
I love that. Well, maybe that's a good, maybe we'll end on what you have to say, Sean.
It's okay.
Okay. Thanks for having me out, guys.
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah.